Thank you. Good morning. As you can see from my title and from the introduction, I'm going to focus on South Koreans and the transnational aspect of South Korean families in Canada. The research that I'm reporting on is actually some very preliminary results from a survey that we're doing in Toronto called the Toronto Korean Family Study. And it's part of a large research team of 8 researchers, 6 of whom are in Ontario and 2 colleagues are in the United States. Okay, to start, I'm just going to give you a brief background on migration from Korea to Canada. It's a very busy graph, and I promise the later charts that you'll see will be much more straightforward and much more simple. From this graph, I do want to point out a couple of things. One is the bottom line, which is in red, reflects Korean migration to Canada, and the trends from 1966 to 2009. In the recent period, you'll see it hovers along the right axis between 6,000 to 8,000 migrants. The bars behind the line show you foreign student migration to Canada. And what you can see from the graph is that foreign students actually outnumber the number of permanent migrants that are coming from Korea. So a couple of trends. One is that permanent migration and foreign student migration from Korea has increased in the recent period. And also what you can actually see in this graph is that from about 2004 onwards, Korean migration has actually been dispersing across Canada. So less so concentrated in Toronto and Ontario and more in the west and the east. For example, in Vancouver, the Prairies, and the Atlantic provinces. Okay, in terms of numbers, what we're talking about is about 150,000 ethnic Koreans in Canada. About 80% are foreign-born or born in Korea. And of the foreign-born population, about 17% are temporary migrants. And this is compared to about 4% across Canada. So as you can see, Korean migration is highly temporary. And among the temporary population is mostly students, as we'll see in the next slide, or in the slide later on in the presentation. What else you can notice from the graph is that generally the Korean population is concentrated in Toronto, but that the temporary population is actually concentrated much more in Vancouver. So given the recent growth of migration to Canada from Korea and the temporary nature, and given the topic of this session, we can ask a couple of questions. One is, what is the nature of transnationalism among migrants from South Korea in Canada? And 2, in what ways are migrants' connections with South Korea dependent on their migration strategy, and what are the implications for retaining them? And what I mean by transnationalism is really a connection to 2 or more places. Okay, so how do South Koreans engage in transnationalism? Well, we can look at it at multi-levels. One is at the household level and another at the individual level. At the household level, we can see transnationalism as a migration strategy in the sense that migration is engaged in for a particular purpose or a particular goal, and that in terms of the formation of it, it's actually families who are separated by national borders. In terms of what I mean by intact family, are family migrants who are here together, so they arrive as a nuclear family. So in the study that we're doing, we're actually comparing migrant families and intact families. In terms of the individual level of transnationalism, we can see individuals as engaged in transnational activities along a number of different dimensions. For example, the economic dimension, do they own property in Korea? Along the cultural dimension, do they watch films? Do they watch Korean television? Do they read Korean newspapers? Do they read Korean magazines? Along the civic dimension, are they in some ways still engaged with Korean organizations in Korea? And along the social dimension, how often do they connect with family and friends? And an example of an emotional dimension is, do they wish they were in Korea? Okay, in terms of the household level, why would Korean families engage in transnationalism as a migration strategy? Well, there are a number of sort of contextual explanations. One is really the globalization of English, it's sort of hegemony of the English language around the world, and the perception of the Korean government that the English is so important really for raising and improving Korea's status in the global economy. So recently, in 1995, the Korean government implemented a globalization policy, which really opened up all sectors of the society to foreign contact. And in particular, and what's relevant for our discussion here, is the changes in the educational system. So in 1997, English was introduced in the national curriculum starting from grade 3. Previously, it had been introduced in grade 7, and people were sort of studying sort of grammatical language so that they can prepare for the university entrance exam. But now it's actually gone beyond this so that university courses are actually fully conducted in the English language. So now more and more Korean students are realizing how important it is for them to acquire the English language for even economic opportunities in Korea. And finally, the changes in occupational qualifications. So now the English language and your aptitude in the English language is actually a consideration for recruitment, for bonuses, and for promotions in large Korean firms. So obviously, this is going to translate into what Koreans call English language mania, and really a rise in educational migration. So what we're seeing is an increase in students leaving parents to study English language abroad. Okay, so this is a closer look at part of the graph that I showed you earlier, and it shows you the evidence of a rise in student migration between 1995 and 97, likely in anticipation of their curricular changes. And these are foreign student entries to Canada in the thousands. The left bar in each of the 3 clusters per year reflects foreign student migrants from Korea, and you can see them in red. The other 2 bars reflect the other top sources of foreign student migrants. And depending on the year it changes, it could be either China, US, France, or India or Japan. What you'll also notice here is a drop in 1998 due to the Asian financial crisis. And what else you'll notice is that in most years, Korea is the top source of foreign students to Canada. What's another trend that we're seeing, and it's contextualized by the curricular changes in Korea to introduce the English language at a much younger age, are really this increasing trend of seeing younger families and younger students. So students generally who are in the primary to secondary school levels. And they're coming with really one parent, typically the mother, and the father is staying in Korea to work. We're now calling them yuhakseng families, and that translates to foreign student families. They're also known as kidogi families or wild goose families, a term which may be familiar to some of you. And some of the women are referred to as kidogi mothers, the ones who are here in Canada. But we're moving away from this term because we found that the term, through our survey, has actually been quite stigmatizing to a lot of the mothers because the perception is that they are homewreckers and that they're very selfish, leaving their husbands and spouses behind to come to Canada with their children.